please hit that like button. If you believe in the transformative power of unexpected encounters, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that will stir your soul. The late afternoon sun beat hard on the windshield of the black Mercedes-Benz as David Miller cranked up the air conditioning. Traffic in West Los Angeles was impossible, as it always was on Fridays, and he tapped his fingers impatiently on the leather steering wheel. At 42, David had built an empire in the construction sector that placed him among the wealthiest entrepreneurs in California. His construction company, Miller & Associates, was responsible for the city's most luxurious developments, and his name regularly appeared in social columns and business magazines. At that moment, however, his mind was focused only on getting to the Beverly Hills Hotel for a business dinner that could define his entry into the international market. His cell phone rang insistently on speaker, but he ignored the calls. Nothing could disrupt that crucial night for his expansion plans. This was how David had always lived, every moment calculated. Every decision thought of exclusively in terms of profit and business growth. The car moved slowly down Sunset Boulevard when he decided to take a shortcut through a side street he knew well. It was turning the corner that something unexpectedly caught his attention. On the right side of the street, in front of the elegant Westwood High School, there was a typical end-of-school-year buzz. Hundreds of people crowded the sidewalk, dressed in their best clothes, carrying bouquets of flowers and holding colorful signs. It was a high school graduation. David normally wouldn't even notice this kind of event, always too absorbed in his own affairs to pay attention to the world around him. But that day, as traffic forced him to slow down, his gaze was drawn to a specific figure in the crowd. A woman with brown hair, wearing an elegant navy blue dress, stood near the school's main entrance. David's heart stopped for an instant. It was Sarah Jenkins, his former personal assistant, the woman who had worked by his side for almost 3 years, organizing his schedule, taking care of his commitments, and who had gradually become much more than just an employee. Sarah, with whom he had had an intense and passionate relationship until the day he abruptly ended everything. That had happened exactly 18 years ago. David remembered that turbulent period of his life perfectly. His company was taking its first steps towards success. He worked 16 hours a day, and Sarah had begun to question his priorities. She spoke about the future, about shared plans, about the possibility of building something together beyond work. He, in turn, saw only unnecessary complications that could hinder his professional ascent. The breakup was cold and calculated, like everything in David's life back then. He simply told Sarah there was no room for serious relationships in his life, that he needed to focus entirely on the company, and that it would be best for her to look for another job. He didn't even give her a chance to explain why their conversations about the future had become so frequent and urgent in recent weeks. Now, 10 years later, there she was. Sarah looked practically the same, just with a few silver strands in her hair and a maturity in her face that time had naturally brought. But that wasn't all that caught David's attention. Beside Sarah was a young woman who made his blood run cold. The girl must have been 16 or 18 years old, wearing a graduation gown and smiling radiantly as she posed for photos with Sarah. But what truly shocked David was the undeniable physical resemblance between him and that young woman. She had his brown eyes, the same face shape, the same jawline, and even that small corner smile that had always been his trademark. For a moment, David thought he was imagining things. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or perhaps the stress of the last few months was playing tricks on his mind. But the more he observed, the more evident the truth became, forming in his head like a terrible puzzle. If you're already captivated by this story and want to be part of a community that values heartwarming tales, consider subscribing to the channel. It's free, and you won't miss any stories like this one that stir our deepest emotions. Your support helps us continue sharing experiences that make us reflect on life's choices and consequences. David's hands trembled on the steering wheel as he tried to process what he was seeing. That young woman couldn't be a coincidence. The physical characteristics were too identical to be a matter of chance. And if what his mind was starting to accept was true, it meant Sarah had been pregnant when he ended the relationship. Traffic began to flow again, but David couldn't take his eyes off what was happening on the sidewalk. He watched Sarah embrace the young woman with maternal affection. He saw how they posed together for more photos. He noticed the way the girl looked at Sarah with adoration and gratitude. It was clearly a mother and daughter celebrating an important moment in their lives. Without thinking twice, David maneuvered sharply to the right, pulling into the parking lot of a nearby building. He completely ignored the angry honks of the cars behind him and parked haphazardly. His heart pounded like never before, and a mixture of panic, curiosity, and regret filled his chest. David got out of the car, his legs trembling, trying to organize the thoughts that rushed through his mind. 18 years. The young woman was approximately 18 years old, exactly the time that had passed since the end of his relationship with Sarah. The numbers matched perfectly, and the physical resemblance was impossible to ignore. He walked slowly towards the school, keeping a safe distance so as not to be immediately noticed. The atmosphere was festive, with entire families celebrating the graduate's achievement. Colorful balloons decorated the entrance, a band played lively music, and professional photographers circulated among the groups, capturing the special moments. David managed to position himself behind a leafy tree that gave him a good view of Sarah and the young woman without being seen. Up close, the resemblance became even more evident and disturbing. The girl had not only his physical traits, but also his gestures. The way she ran her hand through her hair when she was nervous, the way she tilted her head when she smiled. Even her straight and confident posture were characteristics David recognized in himself. Sarah seemed radiant with pride. She kept taking photos of her daughter, constantly adjusting the young woman's graduation cap, and had that sparkle in her eyes that only mothers have in moments like that. David felt a pang of something he couldn't identify. Was it envy? Regret? Or simply the pain of realizing he had completely lost those 18 years of life? The young woman moved away for a few minutes to greet classmates, leaving Sarah alone near the school entrance. David took a deep breath, gathered all the courage he could find, and decided to approach. Every step towards her seemed to last an eternity. His heart was beating so hard, he was sure everyone around could hear it. When he was a few feet away, Sarah casually turned her face in his direction. The recognition was instant. Her eyes widened in surprise. Then they narrowed with something that seemed to be a mix of anger and maternal protection. She quickly looked around as if seeking an escape route, but David was already too close. "Sarah," he said in a low voice, trying to maintain the composure that had always characterized him in difficult situations. "David," she replied dryly, her body visibly tense. "What are you doing here? I was passing by and saw you. I couldn't help but notice." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "The young woman with you, she is..." "She's my daughter," Sarah interrupted him abruptly, lifting her chin with determination. "And before you ask, yes, she's your daughter too." The words hit David like a punch to the stomach. Even expecting that confirmation, hearing it directly from Sarah's mouth made everything terribly real. He leaned against the school wall, feeling his legs give way. 18 years, he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Why did you never tell me?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "I tried, David. Do you remember? In the last few weeks, before you ended everything, I tried several times to talk to you about important matters, but you were always too busy. Always had a more important meeting. Always thought I was being melodramatic. David tried to remember that period, but the memories were hazy. He had indeed been completely absorbed in business, treating Sarah more like an inconvenient employee than as the woman who shared his bed every night. When I found out I was pregnant, you had already fired me and made it clear you didn't want to see me anymore, Sarah continued, her voice trembling slightly. I tried to reach you a few times, but your new assistant had orders not to let me talk to you. I sent letters that came back unopened. I left messages that were never returned. The guilt David felt quickly turned into something much larger and more painful. He vaguely remembered the new assistant commenting on inconvenient calls from the ex-employee, but at the time, he thought Sarah was just trying to get her job back. And then I decided it would be better that way, Sarah continued, watching her daughter, who was chatting happily with classmates across the courtyard. You had chosen your company over me. I wasn't going to let you reject our daughter, too. What's her name? David asked. His voice almost a whisper. Isabelle. Isabelle Jenkins. Sarah made sure to emphasize the last name. She's a brilliant young woman, intelligent, full of dreams. She's going to study architecture at university, did you know? She wants to build houses for low-income people. She has a huge heart and a sense of justice that makes me proud every day. Architect? David felt tears burning his eyes. Your daughter. He had an 18-year-old daughter who dreamed of being an architect, who wanted to help people in need, and he knew absolutely nothing about her. Does she know about me? David asked, trying to control the emotion that threatened to overflow. Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. She knows she has a father. I've always been honest about that. I told her you were a successful businessman, that we lived in different worlds, and that our separation had nothing to do with her. I never allowed her to feel abandoned or rejected. But does she know who I am? Not specifically. She knows your name, but she's never seen you. She never sought details, because she always respected my decision not to force contact that you clearly didn't want. David watched Isabelle across the courtyard. She laughed loudly with her friends, gesticulated animatedly as she told a story, and radiated contagious joy. It was impossible not to notice how she stood out in the group, not only for the beauty she inherited from both parents, but for a magnetic personality that attracted everyone around her. How did you live all these years? He asked, genuinely curious about the life he could have shared. Sarah sighed. It wasn't easy, especially at first. I had to leave the secretarial field because I couldn't get jobs at large companies anymore. Your influence in the market was greater than I imagined. I went back to school, got a degree in business administration, and today I have my own small business management consulting firm. David was impressed. Sarah had always been competent and determined, but transforming herself into a businesswoman while raising a daughter alone demonstrated a strength he had never fully perceived. Isabelle has always been a special child, Sarah continued, her face lighting up when she spoke of her daughter. She started talking early, was always curious about everything, got excellent grades in school. At 10, she was already helping me with company spreadsheets. At 15, she created a social project at school to teach underprivileged children how to budget for their households. If you're connecting with Amelia's story so far, consider supporting us by clicking on Thanks. The Thanks button is a way to financially help the channel and allows us to continue bringing real stories that move us and make us reflect on life's choices and consequences. She inherited your intelligence for numbers, David observed, feeling a strange mixture of pride and loss. And your stubbornness, too. Sarah laughed for the first time since they started talking. When she decides something, there's no changing her mind. Last year, she decided she wanted to work during her holidays to help with college costs. Even though I told her it wasn't necessary, she got an internship at an architecture firm. David felt a tightening in his chest. His daughter working to pay for her own college while he swam in money, buying luxury cars and apartments he didn't even use. The irony of the situation was cruel. "Sarah, can I help with university costs? With anything she needs?" Sarah stared at him with an expression that mixed distrust and maternal protection. "It's not about money, David. It never was. Isabelle and I built a life together. We have our routine, our plans, our complicity. You can't just show up after 18 years wanting to be a father." "I didn't know!" David exploded, louder than he intended, making some nearby people look in their direction. He lowered his voice immediately. "Sarah, if I had known, it would have been different. I would have, what? Abandoned your business? Your ambitions? Your priorities?" Sarah shook her head. "David, you made your decision back then. You chose a life without complications, without emotional responsibilities. You can't change that now just because you discovered there are consequences." Sarah's words were harsh, but David knew she was right. He had made his choices consciously and deliberately. The fact that he didn't know all the implications didn't lessen his responsibility for them. At that moment, Isabelle began to walk back towards Sarah, laughing as she showed something on her phone to a friend. David felt panic seize him. He wasn't prepared to meet his daughter. Not yet. He needed to process all this, understand what he really wanted, and how he could deal with the situation. "She's coming," he murmured. "Yes, and you need to decide what you're going to do. You can leave now and pretend this encounter never happened, as you did 18 years ago. Or you can stay and be introduced as what you are, a stranger who crossed our path by chance." David looked at Sarah, then at Isabelle approaching, and felt that he was at the most important moment of his life. All the business decisions he had made, all the multi-million-dollar deals he had closed, seemed insignificant compared to that choice. "Mom, you won't believe what Sophie just told me." Isabelle arrived excitedly, still looking at her phone, but stopped abruptly when she noticed David's presence. Her eyes, identical to his, examined him with the natural curiosity of a polite young woman who finds a stranger talking to her mother. "Hi," she greeted David with a gentle smile, extending her hand. "I'm Isabelle. Are you a friend of my mom's?" David was paralyzed for a moment. Her voice was melodious, confident, and there was a maturity in it that impressed him. When their hands met in greeting, he felt an indescribable emotion. It was his daughter. His own daughter was there, in front of him, and he couldn't say who he really was. "David," he managed to respond, squeezing her hand carefully, as if it were too fragile to be real. "David Miller." The last name clearly meant nothing to Isabelle, who maintained her polite smile. Sarah watched the scene with evident tension, ready to intervene if necessary. "Miller, that name sounds familiar," Isabelle commented, frowning slightly. "Do you work in construction? I think I've seen that name on some projects around the city." "Yes, I have a construction company," David replied, impressed by his daughter's observational skills. "What a coincidence. I'm going to study architecture, and I always pay attention to companies in the field. What kind of projects does your construction company primarily do?" David found himself engaged in a technical conversation with an 18-year-old who showed surprising knowledge of the real estate market. Isabelle asked intelligent questions about sustainability in construction, questioned aspects of social inclusion in housing projects, and presented her ideas on how architecture could contribute to reducing social inequality. "It's fascinating how you think about these issues," David said, genuinely impressed. "Most students I know only care about the aesthetic aspect of projects." "Oh, but beauty is important too," Isabelle smiled, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I just think we can't create beautiful things only for those who can afford them. Everyone deserves to live in spaces that inspire and elevate the spirit." Sarah watched the interaction with a complex expression. David could see pride for her daughter in her, but also concern about the direction the conversation was taking. Isabelle, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in learning more about David's work. "Mom, you didn't tell me you knew the owner of one of the biggest construction companies in the city?" Isabelle teased, nudging Sarah lightly with her elbow. "It's an old acquaintance," Sarah replied diplomatically. "David and I worked together many years ago." "How cool. And how did you meet here? Was it a coincidence?" David looked at Sarah, awaiting guidance on how to respond. She took a deep breath before speaking. "David was passing by and noticed the graduation. He decided to stop to say hello." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Isabelle accepted the explanation naturally, without questioning the details. "Well, since you're old acquaintances and you work in the field I want to pursue, can I ask a slightly personal question?" Isabelle directed the question to David. "Of course, feel free. Do you have children? How do you balance such a demanding career with family life?" The question hit David like lightning. He looked into his daughter's eyes, saw her genuine curiosity, her sincere search for guidance, and felt the devastating weight of all his past choices. He began, but his voice failed. "No, I don't have children. I always prioritized work." "I see." Isabelle nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine that's a difficult decision. Sometimes I wonder what it will be like when I have my own company. I hope I can balance things better." "Balance is fundamental," David said, his voice laden with a melancholy he couldn't hide. "Some opportunities, once lost, never come back." Sarah shot him a warning glance, realizing he was dangerously approaching risky emotional territory. "Mommy, are you okay?" Isabelle asked, noticing the growing tension. "You seem worried." "I'm fine, darling. Just a little tired. It's been a long and emotional day." "That's true. And we still have Grandma's celebration dinner. Mr. Miller, it was a pleasure to meet you. I hope our paths cross again in the professional future." Isabelle extended her hand again to say goodbye, and David held it for a moment longer than necessary, trying to memorize every detail of that contact. It was possible he would never again have the opportunity to touch his daughter. "The pleasure was all mine, Isabelle. You are an extraordinary young woman. I'm sure you'll be a brilliant architect." When Isabelle walked away to say goodbye to other classmates, David and Sarah were left alone again. The silence between them was charged with tension and unexpressed emotions. David watched his daughter greet teachers and friends, noticing how well-liked she was by everyone around her. "She's incredible," he murmured, more to himself than to Sarah. "Yes, she is, and I made sure of it. I raised a strong, independent, ethical, and determined daughter, without your help and without your interference." Sarah's words were like blades cutting the already open wound in David's heart. He knew he deserved every one of them, but that didn't make it any less painful to hear about everything he had lost. "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but can I see her again? Not as a father, not yet, just as someone interested in following her career?" Sarah studied him for a few moments, evaluating his intentions. "Why now, David? Why, after all these years, do you want to be part of her life?" David took a moment to respond, trying to find words that adequately expressed the whirlwind of feelings overwhelming him. "Because for the first time in my life, I understand what I really lost. All these years, I thought I had made the right choice. I built an empire, accumulated more money than I can spend, achieved everything I thought I wanted. But seeing Isabelle today, I realize all of that is empty. Completely empty. And you think she can fill that void? She's not your project, David. She doesn't exist to fix your regrets." "I know that," he replied quickly. "I don't want to use her for anything. I want to know her. I want to know about her dreams, her plans, her joys. I want to be able to help her if she needs it. I want to be a part of her life, even if it's a small part." Sarah sighed deeply. "David, you need to understand that this isn't just about you. Isabelle has an established life, a formed worldview, an identity built without you. I can't just show up at home and say, "Oh, by the way, that man you met today is your father." But how would she react if she knew the truth? I don't know, Sarah admitted. Isabelle has always been curious about you, but never obsessively so. She's created a complete and happy life. Maybe she'd be interested in getting to know you better. Maybe she'd be hurt at having been deprived of that opportunity. Maybe she'd be angry at me for having made that decision alone. It's impossible to predict. David watched Isabelle laughing with a group of teachers, radiating genuine happiness. She truly seemed like an accomplished and well-balanced young woman. "You did an incredible job raising her," he said sincerely. "Looking at Isabelle, I see that you gave her everything I never could have offered back then. Unconditional love, constant presence, solid values. I would have been a terrible father at 24, probably," Sarah agreed without mercy. "You could barely maintain an adult relationship. Imagine taking care of a child. And now? Do you think now I could be a good father to her?" Sarah stared at him directly. "That's the wrong question, David. The question isn't whether you could be a good father now. The question is, are you willing to accept the place she eventually decides to give you in her life? Even if it's a small place? Even if she decides she doesn't want any contact at all?" David hadn't thought about that possibility. In his mind, since discovering Isabelle's existence, he had automatically assumed they would develop a close relationship. The idea of her rejecting him was terrifying. What if she doesn't want to know me? Then you'll have to accept and respect that decision. Isabelle owes you nothing, David. Absolutely nothing. At that moment, Isabelle ran back to them, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, you won't believe it. Mrs. Turner just told me she has an internship opening at her brother's company. It's an architecture firm that focuses on social projects. Exactly what I want to do." Sarah smiled, infected by her daughter's enthusiasm. "How wonderful, dear. When can you talk to them?" "She said she can give me the contact today. Imagine if I can intern there during my first year of college. It would be perfect." David listened to the conversation, feeling a mixture of pride and frustration. His daughter was building her future, making important decisions, and he was not part of any of it. He was just an observer of a life he could have helped shape. "Mr. Miller," Isabelle addressed him again. "Do you know the company Community Designs? It's a small firm, but they do incredible projects for underprivileged communities." "Yes, I know it," David replied. "The owner, Mr. Peterson, is a serious and competent person. If you can intern there, you'll learn a lot." "Really? What an amazing coincidence!" Isabelle clapped her hands, excited. "Could you? No, never mind. That would be asking too much." "You can speak, Isabelle. What would you like?" "Well, if you know the owner of the company, maybe you could give me some tips on how to present myself better in the interview, or tell me a bit about his professional profile. I don't want to make a terrible first impression." David felt his heart race. His daughter was asking him for help, even without knowing who he really was. It was a small but significant opportunity to contribute to her future. "Of course I can help. Mr. Peterson highly values professionals who have an authentic social vision, not just pretty speeches. He usually asks questions about practical projects the person has already developed, or at least conceptualized." "Perfect. I have several ideas I developed in high school. And do you think he would mind the fact that I'm still in my first semester of college? On the contrary, Mr. Peterson prefers to teach from the beginning, rather than having to correct bad habits that other professionals may have already formed." Sarah watched the interaction with a worried expression. David realized he was getting too involved, offering a type of help that could create unwanted bonds. "Actually," he continued, trying to keep his tone casual, "I can call him and tell him about you, if you'd like. Not to guarantee the internship, but to introduce you as a promising young woman." Isabelle's eyes lit up. "You'd do that for me? But you barely know me." "Sometimes 20 minutes of conversation are enough to recognize talent and character," David replied, looking directly at her. "And you have demonstrated both," Sarah intervened gently. "Honey, we can't abuse Mr. Miller's kindness. He has already been very thoughtful in giving us this information." "Mom's right," Isabelle agreed, but David could see the disappointment in her eyes. "You've already been very generous with your time and knowledge." David made an impulsive decision. "Look, I have a proposal. Why don't you both have dinner with me tonight? I can call Mr. Peterson during dinner, and you can talk to him directly about the internship." The silence that followed was tense. Sarah looked at David with an expression that mixed disbelief and irritation. Isabelle, in turn, seemed torn between excitement and politeness. "That's very kind," Sarah said slowly. "But we already have plans for today. Isabelle's grandmother prepared a special celebration dinner for her." "Oh, right. Grandma would be devastated if we missed her dinner," Isabelle agreed. "She's been cooking since yesterday." David felt a pang of jealousy imagining the family Sarah had built, with a present grandmother and established traditions. Once again, he was the outsider looking in on a life he wasn't a part of. "But maybe we could talk another time," Isabelle suggested hesitantly, looking at her mother for approval. Sarah hesitated visibly. David could see the internal conflict she was experiencing. On one hand, she wanted to protect her daughter from a complicated situation. On the other, she couldn't deny that David was offering a real opportunity to help with Isabelle's professional future. "We can talk about this later," Sarah said diplomatically. "Of course." David pulled a business card from his pocket. "My number is here. If you change your mind, or if Isabelle wants any guidance about the interview, just call." Isabelle took the card carefully, as if it were something precious. "Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. You have no idea how much this means to me." If she only knew who he really was, David thought. Maybe she'd understand exactly how much it meant to him, too. At that moment, an elegant lady about 60 years old approached the group. She had neatly styled gray hair and a warm smile directed mainly at Isabelle. "Grandma!" Isabelle ran to hug the woman. "I thought you were meeting us at home." "I couldn't resist coming to see my granddaughter graduate," the lady replied, returning the hug with evident affection. Sarah introduced them formally. "Mom, this is David Miller, an old acquaintance. David, my mother, Mrs. Peterson." Mrs. Peterson greeted David politely, but he noticed a certain strangeness in her gaze, as if she was trying to remember where she had heard that name before. "Miller, aren't you that businessman who's always in the magazines?" she asked directly. "Sometimes something about the company appears in the media," David confirmed. Modestly, Mrs. Peterson looked at Sarah with a significant expression. Then she turned her attention back to Isabelle. "Well, dear, if we're done here, how about we go home? Dinner's almost ready, and your grandpa is eager to hear all about the graduation." "Actually, Grandma, something amazing happened." Isabelle held her grandmother's arm with enthusiasm. "Mr. Miller knows the owner of a social architecture firm where I'd really like to intern. He offered to help me." Mrs. Peterson raised an eyebrow, looking alternately at David and Sarah. "What an interesting coincidence," she said, with a tone that suggested she didn't quite believe in coincidences. David realized that Sarah's mother was a sharp woman, probably accustomed to protecting her daughter and granddaughter from potentially problematic situations. "And you, Sarah," Mrs. Peterson continued. "How are you feeling about this?" "Coincidence." Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm as surprised as anyone would be." "I imagine so." Mrs. Peterson nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on David. "Mr. Miller, how long has it been since you and my daughter last saw each other?" The question was direct and put David in an uncomfortable position. He looked at Sarah, seeking guidance on how to respond. "Many years, Mrs. Peterson, since we worked together." "I see. And you worked together for how long?" "About 3 years," David replied, realizing that each answer seemed to generate more suspicion in the woman's mind. Isabelle, oblivious to the growing tension between the adults, remained excited about the professional possibilities. "Grandma, Don't you think it's incredible that precisely today, on my graduation day, I met someone who can help me with my future? It seems like fate." Mrs. Peterson smiled at her granddaughter, but maintained a watchful eye as she addressed the adults. "Fate sometimes works in very specific ways, dear." Sarah realized her mother was starting to connect dots that could lead to premature discoveries. "Mom, I think we'd better go. Dad must be waiting." "You're right." "Mr. Miller, it was a pleasure to meet you," Mrs. Peterson said. But David realized she was far from considering that encounter merely casual. Isabelle approached David again to say goodbye. "Thank you very much for everything, Mr. Miller. I really hope I can talk to you about that opportunity." "It will be a pleasure to help you, Isabelle, and congratulations again on your graduation. I'm sure you'll be very successful." When the three women walked away, David stood alone in the school courtyard, watching his daughter walk away from him once again. This time, however, she carried his business card, a small bridge that could connect them in the future. He returned to his car with his mind buzzing with contradictory emotions. The reality of having a daughter was still settling in, but he was already beginning to make plans on how he could approach her gradually and respectfully. If this story has touched your heart, and you want to support it so it can reach many other people, click on Thanks. The Thanks button is a way to contribute financially to our work, so we can continue bringing more stories that help us grow as people and reflect on family and second chances. On the way back home, David canceled the business dinner he had considered so important just a few hours earlier. For the first time in decades, something was more important than his professional commitments. In his apartment in Malibu, a luxurious, minimalist space with an ocean view, David sat on the balcony with a glass of whiskey he barely touched. The contrast between his empty, organized life and the life full of love and purpose that Sarah had built for Isabelle was stark. He picked up his cell phone and dialed Michael Peterson, his old college friend, who now ran Community Designs. "Michael, it's David Miller. How are you?" "David, what a surprise. How are you, man?" "Good, thanks. Listen, I'm calling to tell you about a very talented young woman who might contact you for an internship. Isabelle Jenkins. I just met her today, and I was impressed by her maturity and social vision." "Isabelle Jenkins. That name sounds familiar." "Oh yes, Professor Turner told me about her today. She said she's an exceptional student." David felt a wave of relief. "So, you already have information about her?" "Some. Turner said the girl developed social projects in high school and has a genuine passion for inclusive architecture. That interested me a lot. She's exactly the type of professional you're looking for, Michael. Intelligent, determined, and with solid values. Based on your recommendation and Turner's, I'm already inclined to give her a chance. Where do you know her from, David?" David hesitated. "Well, it's a complicated story. Let's just say she's the daughter of a very special person to me." Michael chuckled. "I get it. New girlfriend with a teenage daughter? You're getting sentimental in your old age, huh?" "Something like that." Robert didn't feel comfortable correcting his friend's assumption. "All right, man. If you're recommending her, you must have your reasons. I'll schedule a conversation with her next week." After hanging up, David felt good about having achieved something concrete to help Isabelle, but also guilty for not being able to reveal his true motivations. The next morning, David woke up early for the first time in months without needing an alarm clock. His mind was completely focused on Isabelle and how he could approach her appropriately. During breakfast, which he rarely had at home, he found himself imagining what it would be like to have a daughter present in his daily routine. The phone rang around 9 o'clock. It was Sarah. "David, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Of course not. How can I help you?" "I need to talk to you. Last night I had a long conversation with my mother, and she asked some questions that made me think about the whole situation." David felt his stomach clench. "What kind of questions?" "She found it very strange that you showed up precisely on Isabelle's graduation day, and when she found out we worked together for 3 years and hadn't seen each other for 18, she started doing the math." "And what did you tell her?" The truth. At least part of it. I told her we had a relationship that ended abruptly, and that you never knew about Isabelle. David took a deep breath. How did she react? Better than I expected, actually. She said she always suspected Isabelle's father was someone I knew well, because our daughter has very specific characteristics that clearly didn't come only from me. And about yesterday? Did she think I acted appropriately? Sarah hesitated. She was impressed by the fact that you immediately offered professional help. She said that either you're a genuinely generous person, or you have very personal reasons for wanting to help Isabelle. And Isabelle, what does she know? Nothing yet. But my mother asked me a question I couldn't answer. If you have the right to know your daughter, doesn't Isabelle have the right to know her father? The question hit David unexpectedly. He had been so focused on his own feelings and regrets that he hadn't fully considered Isabelle's perspective. Sarah, do you think she'd want to know the truth? I don't know, David. That's what scares me. Isabelle has always been curious about you, but never insistent because she respected my decision. What if she gets upset with me for having hidden your encounter with you all these years? But you didn't hide it. You protected her. There's a huge difference. Oh, or is that just what I tell myself to feel better about having made a unilateral decision that affected 3 people? David could hear the anguish in Sarah's voice and felt responsible for creating that complex situation. What do you think we should do? Honestly, I think we should tell Isabelle the truth and let her decide how she wants to deal with it. She's an adult, intelligent, and mature. She deserves to have all the information to make her own choices. Sarah's suggestion was terrifying and liberating at the same time. David desperately wanted to know his daughter better, but he also feared her reaction to discovering who he really was. When do you plan to talk to her? Tonight, after she gets back from English class. Michael Peterson already called her, by the way. They're meeting on Tuesday. David smiled involuntarily. She must be excited. Very. She hasn't stopped talking about it during breakfast, and hasn't stopped talking about you either. About me? She was very impressed by your kindness and availability. She said it's rare to find successful people who are so accessible and willing to help. David felt a mixture of pride and sadness. His daughter had a good impression of him, but it was based on an incomplete identity. Sarah, regardless of how she reacts to the news, I want you to know that I understand your reasons for acting the way you did. You did the best you could with the information you had at the time. Thank you for saying that, David. I know I made mistakes, but I always tried to do what I thought was best for Isabelle, and it clearly worked out. She's an incredible young woman. After they hung up, David spent the rest of the day unable to concentrate on anything. He canceled meetings, ignored important emails, and wondered what the conversation between Sarah and Isabelle would be like that night. Around 8 o'clock that night, his cell phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Mr. Miller? This is Isabelle Jenkins. I hope I'm not bothering you. David's heart stopped. Isabelle, of course you're not bothering me. How did you get my number? My mom gave it to me. She told me who you really are. The silence that followed was charged with emotion. David didn't know if he should say anything or wait for her to continue. Mr. Miller, are you still there? I am, Isabelle. How are you feeling? Confused, surprised, a little upset for not having known sooner, but also curious. Curious about what? David asked, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the whirlwind of emotions he felt. About you. About why my mom made the decision she made. About what it would be like if things had been different. Isabelle paused. And also about why you decided to help me yesterday, even without knowing that I knew who you were. David sat in the leather armchair in his office, trying to find the right words. Isabelle, even before knowing that you knew the truth, I had already decided that I wanted to get to know you better. Not just because you are my daughter, but because in 20 minutes of conversation, I realized that you are an exceptional person. My mom told me about your relationship, about how it ended, and why she could never tell me about you. And how do you feel about that? Isabelle sighed deeply. I'm trying to understand all sides. I know my mom did what she thought was best at the time, and I also understand that you were very young and had other priorities. But still, it hurts to know that your father wasn't present. It hurts, David completed. Yes, I won't lie. It hurts a little. But it also makes me think about how things happen for a reason. If you had been present when I was a child, maybe I wouldn't have become the person I am today. Isabelle's maturity constantly impressed David. You have a very wise way of seeing things. My mom always taught me to look at situations from different angles before forming an opinion. And now I have some questions for you, if it's not too much trouble. You can ask anything, Isabelle. Do you regret the choices you made when you were younger? David didn't expect such a direct question. Every day. Not just for having missed the opportunity to know you, but for having hurt your mother, and for having been a person so focused only on myself. And now, what do you hope will happen between us? Honestly, I don't know. I know I'd like to be part of your life, if you allow me. But I understand that you might not want that, and I'll respect any decision you make. I'd like to get to know you better too, but slowly. I'm still processing all of this. Of course, in your time and your way. My mom suggested that maybe we can meet sometimes to talk. Like friends at first, to get to know each other gradually. David felt a wave of gratitude towards Sarah. Even after everything that had happened, she was facilitating a possible relationship between him and Isabelle. I'd love that, Isabelle. What would you like to do? Actually, I have an idea. Next weekend, I'm going to visit some architectural projects in the city for a college assignment. Would you like to come with me? Since you know the market well, you could give me a professional perspective. The suggestion was perfect. An activity that would allow them to get to know each other better without the pressure of a purely personal situation. It would be an honor to accompany you, Isabelle. Great. And Mr. Miller, can I ask one more question? Of course. Why did you offer to help with the internship even before you knew that I knew who you were? David thought carefully about the answer. Because when I talked to you yesterday, I saw a determined, intelligent young woman with values I admire. I wanted to help because I felt you deserved opportunities to develop your talent. Even if I was just the daughter of an ex-employee, Isabelle, you would never be just anything. Your personality and your character speak for themselves. He heard a smile in her voice when she replied. Thank you for saying that. You know, I'm starting to understand why my mom fell in love with you. The observation touched David deeply. Your mother is an extraordinary woman. I hope you know that. I do. And I'm also starting to understand that maybe you're not the person I imagined you to be. What do you mean? Well, all these years, when I thought about my father, I imagined someone who had deliberately rejected me. Someone who knew of my existence and chose not to care. Discovering that you never knew completely changes the situation. David felt tears burning his eyes. Isabelle, I want you to know that if I had known of your existence, I would have moved heaven and earth to be a part of your life. Even being young and immature, I would never have rejected you. I believe that. And that's why I want to give us a chance to get to know each other. When they hung up, David sat in his office for hours, still processing the conversation. His daughter had reacted with a maturity and generosity he didn't deserve. And Sarah had demonstrated a greatness of heart that deeply humbled him. For the first time in decades, David Miller slept with a feeling of genuine hope about the future. What do you think will be the biggest challenge for David as he tries to build a relationship with Isabelle? Share your thoughts in the comments. The following Saturday dawned sunny, and David woke up with a different kind of anxiety than anything he had ever felt. It wasn't the pre-business meeting tension or the nervousness before an important presentation. It was the pure anticipation of spending time with his daughter, getting to know her as a person and as a father. They had agreed to meet at the Santa Monica Pier at 9 in the morning. David arrived 20 minutes early, constantly checking his watch and adjusting the casual clothes he had carefully chosen to appear approachable, but not sloppy. When he saw Isabelle coming down the stairs to the pier, carrying a backpack full of notebooks and a camera, David felt his chest swell with paternal pride. She wore jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a simple t-shirt, but she radiated contagious energy. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," she greeted cheerfully. "Ready for a whole morning talking about architecture?" "Couldn't be more excited," he replied sincerely. The first place they visited was a housing complex in downtown LA that David's construction company had developed in partnership with a government social program. During the Uber ride, Isabelle asked dozens of questions about the technical and social aspects of the project. "How did you balance low costs with construction quality?" she asked, taking notes in a notebook. "It was one of the biggest challenges of the project," David explained. "We had to completely rethink our processes, use alternative materials, and develop creative solutions that maintained quality without raising costs." "And did the residents participate in the planning?" "Yes, we had several meetings with the families who would benefit. They helped define everything from room distribution to common areas." Isabelle smiled. "That's exactly the kind of approach I want to pursue in my career." When they arrived at the housing complex, David watched his daughter interact with the residents, ask respectful questions about their experiences, and photograph architectural details that demonstrated functionality and social care. She had a natural ability to connect with people from different social backgrounds that impressed him. "My daughter inherited that ease of communication from Sarah," he thought, watching Isabelle talk with an elderly woman who proudly showed off her small apartment. The second location they visited was an urban revitalization project in the city center. There, Isabelle was particularly interested in how the architects had preserved historical elements while adapting the space for contemporary needs. "Mr. Miller, do you think it's possible to do socially responsible architecture without sacrificing financial viability?" she asked, as they observed a renovated square that was part of the project. "I think it's not only possible, but necessary," he replied. "The biggest challenge is convincing investors that social projects can also be profitable in the long term." "How so?" "When you build something that truly meets the needs of the community, you create lasting value. Well-planned properties appreciate more, well-structured communities generate fewer social costs, and companies that demonstrate social responsibility attract better partnerships." Isabelle stopped taking notes and looked directly at him. "You didn't always think that way." "Think that way?" The question caught David by surprise. "Why do you think that?" "Because my mom told me you were completely focused on profit when you were younger. Did something change?" David considered how to answer honestly, without sounding defensive. "You're right. When I was younger, I measured success only in financial terms. I thought social responsibility was something rich people did to improve their public image." "And what changed your perspective?" "Ironically, success itself. When I finally got everything I thought I wanted, money, recognition, power, I realized none of it made me truly fulfilled. I started to question what the real purpose of my work was." Isabelle nodded thoughtfully. "And now I understand that building isn't just about erecting buildings. It's about creating spaces that improve people's lives. And after meeting you, that perspective became even clearer." "How so?" David stopped walking and looked at his daughter. "Because seeing your values, your dreams, and the kind of person you've become, I realize I could have dedicated all these years to building a legacy you'd be proud of, instead of just accumulating wealth. If this story has deeply touched your heart, and you want to support it so it can reach many other people, click on Thanks. The Thanks button is a way to contribute financially to our work, so we can continue bringing more stories that help us grow as people and reflect on family and second chances." Isabelle was silent for a few moments, processing her father's words. When she spoke again, her voice was emotional. "You know, Mr. Miller, can I call you Dad?" David's heart stopped. "Of course you can, if you feel comfortable with it. Dad, I want you to know that I don't hold any grudges from the past. I understand that people change, grow, evolve, and seeing who you are today, I'm proud to be your daughter." David felt tears streaming down his face for the first time in decades. "Isabelle, you have no idea how much those words mean to me." They hugged right there, in the middle of the revitalized square. Two strangers, who were father and daughter, discovering that family love does not depend on time spent together, but on the willingness to build bridges over past mistakes. In the months that followed, David and Isabelle developed a routine of regular meetings. He accompanied her on technical visits. She helped him see his projects from a more human perspective. Sarah, initially cautious, gradually accepted that David had truly changed and genuinely wanted the best for Isabelle. And so we come to the end of another story that teaches us about forgiveness, second chances, and the importance of never being too late to do what is right. If you liked this story and want to continue receiving stories like it, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. And tell me in the comments, did this story remind you of a situation in your life? Do you believe it's never too late to reconnect with family? Share your experience, because stories like these need to be told and heard. Thank you very much for being here with me and being part of this special community that grows every day. Until our next encounter.